Hello and welcome back to the How I Write a Book series. In last week's video we talked about how to pick the right genre for you, what you need to consider when picking genre. If you haven't seen that video, I'm going to leave a link to it up in the cards, and I'll also leave a link to it down in the description box below. So in this week's video we're going to move on. We're going to talk about first person. We're going to talk about which is best, what to consider when choosing first and third person, and whether there is a better option for you when considering the book that you want to write. If you've not been here before, my name is Tracy Mayhew and I write small town contemporary romances set here in the UK and YA fantasy fiction based on myths and legends. I'm going to leave a link to my books down below in the description box if you're interested in checking those out. Okay, so let's get on with this week's video. So let's talk about first person first. First person, when I refer to that, we're talking about using pronouns like I, me, we in our writing. It's told from the first person point of view, so you are in that character's head, in that character's thought processes. As the reader, you are seeing those thought processes develop as the story goes on. So the advantages of first person is that it draws the reader straight into your character's mind space. You've got that close feeling between your character and the reader. What the character is seeing and feeling, the reader is also seeing at the same time. And this can create a real sense of empathy between you and your reader, or between your character and your reader. Also, if it's done really well, your character can get a sense of the character's voice, and that can really be shown in a dual POV book. Say if you're writing a romance, you've got one point of view, first person from the girl, you've got another point of view from the boy, and you can really find a distinctive voice in that. My most recent series, the Appleford series, uses that technique really well. I have a point of view from the female main character and a point of view from the male main character, and I try to find that distinctive voice for each of those characters throughout the story. Even though sometimes they're talking about the same event and they're talking about the same people, they have their own distinct impression of that event or those people, and that is conveyed within the pages of the book. Another advantage of the first person point of view is it can create a real sense of tension and suspense for the reader, because they are experiencing whatever your character is going through at the same time that your character's going through it. So that can work really well for thrillers, it can work really well for horror, I even think it can work really well for romance, because in romance you can really create that sense of tension between the two main characters when they're falling in love, realising they have some chemistry, all that kind of stuff. So let's move on to the disadvantages of first person. So one of the disadvantages is that it is only a limited point of view. If you don't have that dual point of view, like I have in Appleford, then you only get that one perspective throughout the whole of the book, and you can have an unreliable narrator. An unreliable narrator is when an incident or points of view are only influenced by that one character's way of looking at things, and that can cause some frustrations for the reader because you can't get past that one character's viewpoint. Now let's move on to third person. Third person is when we talk about using the pronouns he, she, they, etc. Some of the advantages of third person is that it gives the reader a broader perspective throughout the whole of the story. And this especially lends itself really well to multi-POV fantasy, for instance. I've read a lot of multi-POV fantasies. John Gwynn's The Faithful and the Fallen series does this really well. It gives you a much broader scope for the story, lots of different character points of view, and you can have this closeness between the reader and the character as well. So even though you're not writing in first person, you can still develop that closeness. When I wrote Prophecies of Fate series and even my Viking saga series, I write in third person and I developed that closeness between you are still in, for example, in the Prophecies of Fate, you are still in Kai's head, you are still experiencing everything with Kai as he experiences it. Third person also lends itself to better descriptions. With first person, you're kind of limited to the fact that unless the character is going somewhere completely new to them and seeing things for the first time, you are limited to the fact that they have lived in this village or this town. So it would feel jarring to then describe that to the reader. There are ways of doing it, but you can do it much better with third person, so description can sometimes work better with third person. So some of the disadvantages of writing in third person is that at times you can kind of get this feeling that the character is still at arm's length from the reader. Maybe it's not, you can't create that sense of empathy as well as if you were writing in first person. Another disadvantage is that sometimes if you write a multiple point of view story, sometimes you can create confusion. We could do head hopping occasionally. I mean, I've done that in my early edits. Sometimes when I'm writing in third person, I check myself and realise that I've head hopped from one character to another without even realising it. And that can create some confusion for the reader as well, and a sense of frustration. Some people will argue that first person is better for some genres while third person is better for other genres. For me personally, I've read romance books that are written in third and first person. I've written romance books that are written in third and first person. I will go on to talk about which I prefer in a second, but I've done both. I've also read fantasies that are written in first and third person. Thrillers can be written in both as well. I think it really depends on what you prefer as an author, and we're just about to get into that with my writing as an example. For me personally, I prefer writing my fantasies in third person. I have considered first person for my fantasies. When I was starting the Viking saga, I thought I'd give first person a go, but it just didn't feel right. Mostly because I do want to create a multiple POV story, and I just feel for me personally that works better at the moment with third person. In contrast, when I started writing my romance books way back when, I started writing in third person. No Strings was written in third person, as was December Magic, my first Christmas novella. However, my second full-length romance novel, What Happened in Vegas, I did start writing that in third person because I just went from No Strings to What Happened in Vegas, and it just felt natural to just continue the third person voice. However, I couldn't get past the second chapter. There was just something blocking me, and I didn't know what it was. And I was speaking to my mum one day, just venting about the whole thing. And then I just realised, I think it needs to be in first person. So I went back to the drawing board, ripped apart what I'd written, changed it to first person. And from then on, I felt much more comfortable writing my romance in first person, and I think I will continue to do that just because it feels more comfortable to me. Doesn't mean it won't change, doesn't mean my next series after Appleford I won't go back to third person. I might very well do that, but for the moment I can't see myself doing that. Just like with my fantasy, I might one day decide first person for my next series will work better. That will be a future me problem to decide. But what I'm saying is, even if you start one way, there is nothing stopping you from changing that perspective if you feel the current POV is not working. So if you start in first and you feel like that things are a little bit forced for you, then try writing in third person, and vice versa. I have been asked occasionally if I would ever consider rewriting No Strings in first person, and the answer to that is always going to be no, because I feel like that story did need to be told in the third person. And the same for December Magic. But as I say, everything else since then has been written in first person because I just feel like that's more comfortable for me to write in right now. And my Romance in the Lake series was written from one POV. Each of the 5 books was written from one POV, so the main character, so Jess or Holly or Sophia or Kelly or Nikki. And it was just written from their point of view. But when I started writing Appleford, so the first book in the Appleford series is Not Just for Christmas, and I started writing that book straight from Kate's point of view. But for some reason, I don't know whether it was because I'd read a few romances that had, the dual POV, but I just felt it was better to tell the story from Kate's point of view and from Brandon's point of view. So that's what I did, and that it worked so well. It's kind of set up the tone for the rest of the series, which is great because it's done something different from Romance in the Lakes, which is what I was looking for. So my conclusion is that you do you find out what works for you. Like I said last week with genre, do not be afraid to experiment. Do not be afraid to start one way, change if you need to. It's a bit of a pain when that happens, especially if it happens like halfway through the book or after your first draft. But just stay aware of what you are doing and how you are creating your story, and hopefully you will catch those doubts early, like I did, and then you'll be able to change it and it won't be such a pain. Just stay open to the possibility of trying both. What I would advise you is to don't get boxed in by genre expectations. A lot of people, I know this from the books that I've written. When I wrote Romance in the Lakes, I got a lot of reviews saying that romance felt jarring to be written in the first person, which I thought was quite funny because I've read quite a lot of romance written in the first person. But anyway, so some of my reviews on some of my books criticise me for using the first person. But stay true to what you think, okay? If you feel that your story is better told in first person, stick with it because it's your story at the end of the day. It's your story to tell. But although there are those reviews that do criticise me for using first person, there are a ton of other reviews that are telling me they love the story. They are enjoying the story for what it is, and it's brilliant. there will be people out there who get what you are trying to do, even though there are always going to be some people who will criticize you for doing what you're doing. So just stick with what you think works best for you and your characters and your story, because that's all that matters at the end of the day. And like I said earlier, don't be afraid to switch things up if necessary. If something isn't working, try something else. There is no point digging yourself an even deeper hole because you're determined to do it in one way if it doesn't feel right. Like I say, with what happened in Vegas, as soon as I listened to Alex, my main character, she wanted to tell that story through me. She wanted to tell her own story. So I did that, and it worked so much better for me, and I think for the story as a whole. So that's it for this week. I hope you have enjoyed a second video in my How I Write a Book series, bringing you writer advice the way I do things. Don't forget, if you didn't see last week's video, I'm going to leave a link to that video over here. Please consider subscribing to the channel. You will be notified of the next video in the series next week, which will be all about character and how to write characters your readers will fall in love with. So until then, have a good week. Bye.